And I remember asking God if I was dying. And he said yes. He said, yes, you're dying, but you'll be fine. Every little thing is going to be okay. And I said, I want to say goodbye to my sons. I'd like to say goodbye to my sons. Meanwhile, I'm able to hear my son. It dawned on me that I can hear him talking. And what he's saying is her eyes are in the back of her head. And then he would say, yes, I'm lifting up her eyelids now. Her pupils are dilated and she's gray and cold. And then he said, I can't find a pulse. I can't find a pulse anywhere. And he was practically, I mean, he was telling them, when are they going to get here? When is somebody going to get here?
Good evening and welcome to Earth to the Other Side. I'm your host, John Glasspool, and tonight I have the pleasure of speaking with Lori Curad. Lori is a medium, and she says she hears the voice of God since having two profound NDEs back in 2008. While working in healthcare, she got a viral infection and many spiritual experiences in between. I doubt I'll be asking many questions tonight, Lori, as we've been talking for hours this past week. And it's been wonderful, but I've been really looking forward to seeing how it's all going to unfold here. So I'll give the floor to you. Thank you for being on the channel and welcome.
Good evening, and thank you for asking me.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Just start from the beginning, from the first NDEs back in 2008.
I had a what was called a terminal disease from a viral infection that I had contracted while I worked in healthcare. I worked in pulmonary critical care, and like I said, I had gotten a viral infection. At first, the doctors thought that I had the flu, and it just kept progressing, and I wound up collapsing. And I ended up in CCU. They wound up stabilizing me, did a CAT scan, found out that the pericardium, which is the sac that encompasses your heart, and it had stiffened and was preventing my heart from beating. So I wound up having to have that pericardium removed. Once removed, um, they found out how much damage was done to my heart. And to make a long story short, they placed a pacemaker in, a dual chamber pacemaker, no defibrillator. This was just to run the atrium and the ventricles, um, because there's a sinus node that sends messages back and forth from your heart to your brain that controls the rate that your heart beats depending on how active you are. If you're running, versus if you're sitting, my heart didn't know how to respond. So I kept passing out. Um, what was happening, unbeknownst to the doctors, while I was telling them that I was having a hard time breathing, and they were assuming, well, that's just the normal progression of the viral infection and the disease and the damage. But what was happening was I had developed a blood clot, and apparently it was resting against the pulmonary aorta. I had become bedbound. I was on oxygen. I couldn't walk. I had to crawl to the bathroom. I had to crawl to a small refrigerator that we put upstairs in the den to get something to drink. One night, I went to bed after telling the doctors that it was just getting worse and worse. And when I went to bed that night was when I had the first series of NDEs. Went to sleep, and the next thing I knew, I woke up and my body, I felt like I was on a one of those torture boards that stretches you, um, head back, couldn't breathe, um, could not call out for help, could not do anything. But while this was happening, I started hearing um, words and phrases in my head saying things like good girl, uh, relax, every little thing's going to be okay. And then I started hearing some strange things. I did hear my great grandmother. She said to me, uh, good girl. Now, you're such a good girl. And that was repeated several times during that episode. And meanwhile, everything was dark. Um, and by that time, when I started hearing I was being spoken to, the pain was it was going away. Things got quiet, and all I felt was peace. And I would hear these phrases that made absolutely no sense to me. Well, I wasn't actually thinking at the time, I was just listening. And I would hear things like, I know it sounds crazy, but I was hearing things like Tony the Tiger, they're great. I was hearing tricks are for kids. I was hearing got milk, things like that. And, if you can be in that condition, you're hearing things like that. And it's just really odd and strange. And after having experienced the pain and then not experiencing any pain, but being in the dark, I was very confused. And then the next thing I know, I'm back in my room, back in where I could feel my body, and back I could see around me because the bedroom was not pitch dark at all, not by any means. And I was soaking wet. I think I was in a state of shock. I didn't know what had happened. And the next thing I know, it happened again. The pain hit me, and my body just went into this um, almost like a seizure, but not a grand mal seizure, the kind that just stretches you out. And same thing happened, pitch black, um, and started hearing this voice saying, good girl, it'll be okay. Everything will be okay. And then I was back again. Um, this happened several times. And after about the fourth time, I laid there thinking and trying to figure out what had happened. And I was just laying in a pool of water. My body was just soaking wet. And I tried to sit up on the edge of the bed because I just felt very, very confused. And then I heard this voice telling me that he was God and that he was with me and that I should follow him And you have to understand, I had always believed that there was a God, and I did believe that there had been a person by the name of Jesus, and that these things did happen to him, but there were certain things that I could not uh, wrap my mind around, let's say. And then I had had a bad experience with the church when I was very young. So I had stopped going. I wasn't reading scripture. So I was not a religious person. Um, so I'm hearing this voice telling me that he's God, and he's telling me that I need to go in, take a shower, that I will feel better, because I was drenched, I was shaky. But what was amazing was I felt stronger when I got up out of bed in walking to the bathroom, where before I had been so weak that I could, like I said, there were times I had to literally crawl to the bathroom. I could not stand in a shower. I had a shower chair. Well, at that point, I was able to get into the shower, stand, and take a shower. And while I was taking a shower, this gets strange, I was told to put my head back and let the water fall over my face. And I did that, and I was told to put it back further. And I put it back further, and I was told to put it back further. And then I was told to turn my head to the side. Well, the water started to run up my nose. And, this might be a little too much, but we didn't really you have neti pots and things like that. But it was almost that sort of what was happening. And then I was told to change the water temperature to where it was cooler, make it cooler, make it cooler. And at that point, my body went into that seize again. And I heard everything was dark. Um, then the pain went away, and all I could hear was God's voice telling me it would be okay, everything would be okay. And I wound up waking up, or actually coming back, because I could feel that. I don't know how to describe it. It's like this pop feeling. Um, and I was laying in a floor full of water, because when I had collapsed, I had fallen basically out of the shower and was laying on the bathroom floor, confused. Went back, sat on the edge of the bed. My husband at the time had woken up and gotten up, and I said to go into the bathroom, and I had just looked at him and said, I think something is terribly wrong. And he didn't have a lot of patience, wasn't having a good time at work, and um, we were having issues. His mother had become ill, and he wasn't handling it very well. But regardless, he had said, Laurie, I've got to be at work in 2 hours. So I'm I'm sitting there kind of in shock and wondering what happened. Because of what had happened in the shower, here I had been soaking again from the original pain that I felt. And I heard the voice, which I'm going to from now on call God source, tell me to go to take a shower. Well, leaving my bedroom, you go through a dressing room, and that dressing room has a door that goes off to another bathroom and then a door that goes off to the den. And as I was heading in that direction, I was told to sit down in the chair in the den, to sit down. And I was told that God had a few questions that he wanted to ask me, and that I was to answer them yes or no. No explanations, no, nothing but yes or no. So he started asking me questions. Have you ever done this? Have you ever done that? Have you ever, you know, this kind of thing? And I answered truthfully. I had absolutely no problem answering truthfully. And he had asked one question, and I didn't know the answer to it because it was something that I had forgotten about. And I was trying to remember whether that had happened or not. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but needless to say, there were things that I had just suppressed. So I couldn't really answer. Well, all of a sudden, all of these pictures started playing like a movie in my head of things. And then all of a sudden, everything just made sense. He had explained to me that God was love, and that there are things that we either forget or not, but they still affect us profoundly in the way we interact with others, the way we see things, because you talking with me right now, you're forming an opinion about me, about what type of person I am, and about, you know, what I may have experienced or not. And my version of myself is different. And everybody that I know has their version of me and of you according to what they've seen and they've experienced. Um, you can meet 1,000 people, and each one will have a different, a different experience with you, and you the same. So God was explaining this in, I'd like to call it short speak. Um, he would say a few words, but I knew the full sentence. And there were other issues that he brought up with me. And then he had me go downstairs and we have a summer kitchen. And it's where we would keep drinks and things like that, and crackers and whatnot, because we have a porch out front. So he had me pour myself a small glass of wine. And I'm not a drinker. I'll have a drink once in a while, but we're talking, I guess it was in the middle of the night at some point. And he had me pour it. And when I went to get a glass, he had me get the good crystal. And then he had me get a, a cracker. And he told me to go outside. And it was pitch black. He told me not to turn on the light, to listen to him, that he would lead me, to follow his voice. Um, Now we have a pergola with a small pond. So he had me take out that wine and that cracker and walk out in the pitch black and walk off of my deck and he was directing me when to step down. Now, mind you, I had days where I could not walk. I couldn't walk without holding on to something or someone. And then I had days where I couldn't even come out of bed, let alone walk down the steps and out the door and down, the deck, let alone walking down slate and cobblestone path. And he would tell me where to go. And then I had come up and he told me to stop, then told me to lean over. And I realized that I was at the edge of the stone surround of the pond. And he had me reach down and cup my hands and bring water up and pour it over my head and down my face. And all of this with my eyes shut. So then he told me to go back in the house and to go back up to the den and to sit down at the in the chair by the desk. I had a roll top desk because he still wanted to speak with me. He began to explain that he was love, that he knew how much I had suffered, and that he had always been with me, and that he always would be with me. The most profound part of my near death experience came after the time when my heart had stopped, because later on, after seeing the cardiologist with my pacemaker and with MRIs, they saw what had happened, and they knew that my heart had stopped several times that night. The doctor had asked me if I believed in divine intervention because he had run tests and there were things it, that had completely failed, and parts of the organ were what they call ischemic, meaning the tissue was dead. So the doctor was saying, you don't have all of this dead tissue in your kidneys, in your uh, lung, in your brain, and then all of a sudden it's gone. It doesn't happen. Once that tissue dies, that's it. It doesn't just regenerate. So, do you believe? Well, I had not told anybody about anything that I had experienced because I thought they would think that I was crazy. Um, because the morning after this whole episode, while God was speaking with me, I was so exhausted from everything that I had been through and the shock of everything. And at some point, he had told me to go lay down. And I went and I laid down in the guest room, which was right off of the den. So it was closer. And I did notice that the sun was starting to come up. So I laid down and then I woke up and realized that it was 7:30. And I was told that I needed to get dressed and that I was going to go for a ride, for a drive. Now, I hadn't driven much at all, especially in the last few months before then. So I went, I got dressed, and while I was getting dressed, he was actually telling me what to put on, what to wear. And I had a floor length mirror in the one room. And I can remember looking at myself and seeing that I was skeletal looking. And I can remember thinking, why did nobody notice that this was happening to me? There were keys there for the van that he had used some days for work. It was a large utility van. So I was told to use those keys and drive that van. So I did. Um, and I was told to drive up to the gas station and to put $5 worth of gas in the van. So I did. And then I was told where to drive, where to turn. And I'm very familiar with the city that he had guided me to because I had worked in home health care. And so I was very familiar with different parts of the city. But he had taken me to a part of the city that I had never been in. So I had no idea. But he was telling me at the third light, you're going to turn on such and such a street. He was giving me the names of streets that I would have no idea what these streets were. And I would come up to the third light, I'd see the street, and I'm thinking, son of a gun. you know, that's the street. And this was happening. And I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe I'm not crazy. So he would have me pull up in front of a building and stop and go walk to the building. Well, the first building that I walked to, it was a red brick building. It looked like it could have been a small school, very small school. So I walked in the door and there was a sign and it was a church. And there was a receptionist there and she asked me if she could help me. And I was told I could still hear God speaking. And I was told to ask if there was a certain, he gave me a name, if there was a certain person there. And she said, no, I'm sorry, there's nobody here by that name. So I was guided to say, well, thank you very much. I must have the wrong building. Thank you. So this happened 7 times. I did not understand the meaning of the 7 times until much later. But each place that he led me to was a church, but a different type of church. Like one church was in what looked like a rec hall. One church was at the end of a strip, like a strip mall. Um, what he was doing was showing me that a church didn't have to be a building with a steeple and bells and when you walk in the door, you're faced with the pews and the pulpit is in front of you. And I realized later on, and he had told me that he was teaching me that the church is not the buildings, the church are the people. And that he knows that I have not had much experience, good experience with the church. And he said, with either church, actually. So he was going to guide me. Um, by this time, I had come home. I looked down at the gas gauge because I had noticed it when I put the gas in, and it was exactly where the needle was when I had first gotten in, um, which I found interesting. And so when my husband left to go take a shower, which was his routine when he came home from work, I walked outside and I was in tears. And I walked onto the deck and I was kind of leaning against the deck and I put my hands over my face and I was crying. And I was told by God to go get my Bible and take my hands down from my face. So I took my hands down from my face, and when I did, there was a hummingbird right smack up against my face. So I went upstairs and I was embarrassed. God's speaking with me and I can't find a Bible. So I wound up finding one, and he told me where to go and what chapter, what verse. And I'm turning the pages, I'm looking, and I'm embarrassed that I'm taking so long to find it. And I get there and I look down at the verse and it says, "Husbands, love your wives." My husband is talking with me at different times when he would walk out to the living room. And while God was speaking with me and he started speaking with me, I didn't feel like, I felt like I was being torn between two people trying to have a conversation with me. And if I cut my husband off, he would think that I was nuts. And if I cut God off, what was God going to do to me? So I wound up getting up, excusing myself, and going into the bathroom so that I could finish listening to what God was saying to me. And I realized after a while that I was being taught that God knows that we have to stop at times, like if the phone rings, if your mother calls you, if your husband calls you, if your children are calling you for something, and God is talking with you. He does not expect you to be rude to the person in front of you. He knows our hearts, he knows our intention. Just think it in your mind. You can say, "I really hate doing this, but and you can choose to listen to the other person that is speaking with you without feeling like you've offended God." So I was learning how to answer God and ask God questions, even if I was in a room full of people. I would ask God to give me a sign, and I would ask for a specific sign. Nothing outrageous, just small things that I would be able to feel or to see happen, you know, just something moving slightly. Uh, all the windows were shut, the door was shut. So I would ask questions. I had a lot of questions. And so I would ask question, and sure enough, things would happen. I would go through these periods of pure fear, um, because here I am, and God is speaking with me. At this point, I had no doubt that it was God, and I had remembered, or God put the memory in me that just a couple of weeks before uh, that night, I had made a phone call asking someone very close to stop over so that I didn't tell them. It was so that I could say goodbye. But that was why. And even though they were very close, there was an excuse not to come over. And it wasn't like I had been asking people. I did not like asking anybody to help me. Um, so when that happened, I literally had crumbled to the floor and had said, "That's it. I give up. I can't take anymore. I can't do anymore. I don't know why I'm still here. I'm done. I'm done." And like I said, that was just a couple of weeks before. I had been so weak. I had also called both of my sons. One lived in Florida, one lived in Ohio. And I had told them, because they were going to have to get a wheelchair. They were going to have to, now this was before the near death that night. Um, I had told them that I didn't care how they did it. I wanted them to speak with each other, get together, and take me, and the three of us go to a beach together. I had taken them to the beach from the time they were babies, and to the rivers, and the water was just. And I was going to have a talk with them because I did not think I was going to be around long. So I'm still hearing from God. I'm doing what He's doing. And while this is going on, I'm also experiencing some spiritual warfare. Um, Later to find out and to realize that that's because of the gifts that I have and different things and other things that had happened, that can be a very normal occurrence. And I did not know that at the time. But I felt like, at times, I felt like I was fighting for my life and fighting for my sanity. And God was, there was this battle that was happening. And because I was able to hear God, and I was starting to hear from spirits, and I could see ripples in energy. I noticed that I could see energy, like little pixels, or like if you would have a sheer curtain up, um, that you could see through, and had like a kaleidoscope, only really, really teeny, 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 tiny little dots. Um, I could see that energy, and it would change colors into masses that later on I began to realize that I could see spirits because the energy would change and form certain outlines and pictures. And so it comes time for us to go to Florida. By then, I was able to walk around a little more. I had much more energy. So we went to Florida. I still wanted to speak to my children because now I was able to have a talk with them about there is a God. We go to Florida and go to the beach. One of the things that happened while we were at the beach, we get in the water. My son lifts up his foot and reaches down and he holds up this sand dollar, huge, big sand dollar. And he said it's right under the sand. So we started shuffling our feet. The whole area, the whole area under us was just a carpet of sand dollars. It was just a carpet of sand dollars. And I heard God say to me to take three, that I could take three and I could lay them on my towel to let them dry and not to feel guilty, but take three. So I did. And there were several things. Walking up the beach, I was collecting different shells, and we walked in between some pylons on the beach, and some shells caught my eye, and I went to bend over to pick them up, and I heard God tell me, and he would call me little one. He would say, little one, put the shells down. You have some shells. Let's leave some shells for some others to find. It wasn't like I had a lot of shells, but it was like something that I would have said to my children when they were small. So we get back to my oldest son's. We had had dinner, I was starting to feel a little tired. I was hurting. I was achy. Um, my muscles, I wasn't in tip top because I had spent a long time, getting weaker and weaker. My muscles, still needed to be built up. Um, I was also taught about that. I knew that God was holding me up many of the times where I was surprised that I was able to endure certain walks. And we get back to my son's house. He has a hot tub out on the lanai. So I had said, I'm going to go back and take a shower, get the salt water off of me and everything. And then I'm going to sit in the hot tub for a little bit and relax my muscles. So they were like, okay, my youngest son, he was leaving because he and his girlfriend and my grandson, they had decided to stay in a hotel while we were there and not at my oldest son's. I went back to the bathroom and started to change. And all of a sudden, I started to get that excruciating pain in my chest. And it started to go up my neck. And I started to feel nauseous. And I wound up, you know, singing to the porcelain and getting so weak. I was literally, I couldn't even kneel on the floor. I was sitting on the floor and I was hearing God tell me to rub my artery, to just push and rub, push and rub, push and rub. And I was confused at that point. Afterwards, hindsight's 2020. I've got a bit of a medical background. I understand now. At the time I didn't because I was, and the next thing I know, I am waking up I'm saying waking up, but I'm regaining consciousness from the bathroom floor. And I'm trying to call out to my son and daughter in law. I made it I wrapped a towel around me because I was soaking wet. Um, I wrapped a towel around me. I made it to the guest room, which was right around the corner from the bathroom. And I had absolutely no energy. I I could hardly think. I heard God telling me to call my son, that everything would be okay. And I remember asking God if I was dying. And he said yes. He said, yes, you're dying, but you'll be fine. Every little thing is going to be okay. And which there is something to that saying. And just listen to the Lord, follow me, and you'll be okay. And I said, I want to say goodbye to my sons. I'd like to say goodbye to my sons. And meanwhile, like I said, I had been calling for my son, for my oldest son. And meanwhile, I'm able to hear my son. It dawned on me that I can hear him talking. And what he's saying is, her eyes are in the back of her head. And then he would say, yes, I'm lifting up her eyelids now. Her pupils are dilated, and she's gray and cold. And then he said, I can't find a pulse. I can't find a pulse anywhere. And he was telling them, when are they going to get here? When is somebody going to get here? And I would feel that popping sensation again. And my son would be, Mom, Mom. And I'm like, what happened? What happened? And he's like, I couldn't find your heartbeat. I couldn't find your heartbeat. The ambulance is coming. Um, and then the next thing I know, blackness. And God is talking with me, and he's telling me, your family's going to be fine. And I said again, am I dying? And he said, yes. And I said, I'd like you to let me please let me speak with my sons. And he's telling me that he will let me speak to my sons. Well, I kept feeling that sensation of being pushed. And then I'd see my oldest son again. And then all of a sudden, he'd be gone. The next thing I knew, I was on the stretcher. And the paramedic said, go get her son. Let her son talk to her. And the other paramedic said, we don't have time for that. And I mean, I could hear them. And the other paramedic said, we keep losing her. There's something going on here. There's something going on. And the one paramedic said, go get her son and let her say goodbye. So they did. They got him, and I was able to say goodbye. And I told him that I wanted him to tell his brother, and I wanted him to tell his father, and that meanwhile, then they just took me out to the ambulance, and the whole way in the ambulance, I was having the same thing happen, where all of a sudden, but there wasn't any pain. This time there wasn't any pain. I was just, it was like I was just gone. And God was speaking with me the whole time. And I could hear the ambulance driver saying, or the paramedic that was sitting with me saying to the driver, she's back again. She's back again. And then I would hear him say, now she's going. And God was saying to me, you must listen. You must listen. When you open your eyes, when you can see them, you need to say the word pacemaker. You need to say pacemaker. You need to say pacemaker. And he kept saying that. And then he said, say pacemaker. So I'm saying pacemaker, but it was telepathic. I wasn't saying it from my mouth. He was talking with me, and it's like we were just thinking to each other. And so he said to me again, say pacemaker. And I thought that I was saying it from my mouth, but I couldn't hear the voice. It's a strange, there's a difference in, because I couldn't feel it coming out of my throat. I couldn't feel my tongue. I couldn't feel, I could just hear the voice, and I could hear my voice saying pacemaker. And God would say again, say pacemaker. And I would say pacemaker. And this went on. And then all of a sudden there was this pop, and God was saying pacemaker. So I said pacemaker. And he said pacemaker. So I said pacemaker. And again, darkness. And God is talking with me, and he said, meanwhile, I didn't know they were putting all of these they were putting IVs in me. They were putting, hanging ringers. They were trying, apparently, according to my son, they were trying to get information from him about what was going on. And God was saying again, the next time you open your eyes, I want you to say, trying to get this in the right order, um, heparin, heparin, repeat, say heparin. So I'm saying heparin. He's saying, say heparin. And so I heparin. So all of a sudden again, boom, I'm in this room and heparin is coming out of my mouth, which triggered my son's memory, apparently, that I had had pulmonary embolisms before, because he knew that had happened. And so he was able to tell them that I had a history of pulmonary embolisms, and he was able to tell them that I had a pacemaker. And so I could hear talking in the room. I could hear the doctors talking to my son. I could hear them asking him different questions. But it was like, they talk about tunnel vision. This was like tunnel hearing. Okay. And God was telling me, listen, listen. And I've often asked God why I did not see anything. I was always afraid to tell people that I had a near death experience, because I was afraid that if they heard that I didn't go through a tunnel, with all these lights and everything, that they would think that I was lying. And then he said seizure. Then he said, now say Ativan and seizure. Say Ativan and seizure. So I said Ativan and seizure, and God would say repeat. And I would say Ativan and seizure, repeat. I'd say Ativan and seizure. And next thing I know, I'm being yelled at by this doctor with a German accent. He's yelling at me and he's saying, you're not having seizures. You're not having seizures. And I heard him say to my son, is she seeking drugs? Is she seeking? And I could hear my son. And next thing I know, I'm out. I'm gone again. And God is speaking with me. And I'm like, I don't think he believed me. I don't think I was talking about the doctor. I was like, I don't think he believed me. This doctor thought that I was seeking drugs. And I said, well, if you had brought my medicines in from my suitcase, you would have seen that I had a whole bottle of Ativan, because they had prescribed Ativan for me, because they knew I wasn't getting any sleep when I was so sick. And I wasn't taking it because I don't like to take drugs that are going to, I just don't like to do it. It felt like a yo-yo that was kind of being tossed back and caught again, tossed and caught, tossed and caught, if that makes sense. It was like that, just tossed and caught. Um, so I just was tossed again. And I looked over to my side because I heard some noise, and I had heard talking, but I couldn't tell what direction it was coming from. And I saw a doctor different from the doctors and the people that I had seen before. And he came right over to me and he was, hey, you've had a rough night. He said, nice to have you back. And I'm like, what happened? What happened? He said, well, We had your pacemaker checked, and because of all of the time you spent in the salt water and the salt air, combined with the fact that you had a pulmonary embolism, he said, you had to have your pacemaker looked at, because one of the things that was happening was the leads to the pacemaker, because it's a dual chamber. And like I said, one controls the atrium and one controls the ventricles. Um, each one was trying to make my heart pump when my heart wouldn't pump. There was like a clicking sound that they could hear the pacemaker trying to cause the muscle to contract, but it wasn't contracting. They had somebody come in to check the pacemaker. Meanwhile, I started having seizures. So they put me on heparin. They put me on Ativan to stop the seizures. He worked it so that it was moving in tandem where it would be able to help my heart. When my son was able to come back, my oldest son, I asked him, I said, was there a German doctor in there? Because I kept hearing a German, and I think he actually yelled at me. And my son laughed, and he was like, you heard that? He said, well, you were only able to say seizure and Ativan, and that was it. I said, well, I could hear him yelling. The next thing I know, I woke up in a hospital room, and when 2 days had gone by, I had slept or I was out of it. One of the other, I'm not sure, but I knew I was sleeping because I had been dreaming, and you know, so God was speaking with me. And I remember saying, I thought you told me I was going to die. And he said, well, you did. But I thought that I wasn't going to come back when I had asked you if I was dying. I said, you didn't tell me the last time that I was dying. He said, I had other things that I needed to tell you, but you were alone. I needed to tell you other things this time. My son had come in the room. Apparently, he had run into the doctor in the hallway. He came into the room, and that's when I had said about the German doctor, and my son was like, he was taken off of your case, and another doctor was put on your case. He was sent out of the room. The doctors released me with the understanding that I would be seeing my cardiologist. And because we already had plane tickets to come home. Um, when I got home, there were several things that happened. Before I even came home, my oldest son had asked me if I had read a book called The Celestine Prophecy. I was like, no. I said, why? And he said, I just wanted to know if you read it. Read the book and then talk to me when you've read the book. I had completely forgotten about it. I went into a bookstore for something else. I went into a used bookstore, and I heard God tell me to turn, to make a turn down a certain aisle, make another turn. And I did. I followed, and then I heard him tell me to look to the left and look on the third shelf down. And I did. The Celestine Prophecy was sitting there. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm supposed to buy that now. I'm supposed to get it. So I bought it and I read it. And I was like, oh, wow. So I called my son and I said, what made you ask me about the Celestine prophecy? He said, the whole time things were happening. I was noticing things with you. And when certain things you would comment, and then something would happen. And then I just noticed all these things, and I had read the Celestine prophecy, he said, probably a month or so before. And it just reminded me of that book and what these people were learning. And I just wanted you to read it. Meanwhile, I was still looking for somebody to help me to understand what was going on. My parents had a 50th wedding anniversary. I'm the oldest of five. So I was asked if I would speak. By this time, I was hearing from God regularly, and I could even feel, if I relaxed my throat and tongue enough, I could feel the words bubbling up. It's hard to explain. So when I wrote the speech, as I was writing, I could hear God telling me what to write. And afterwards, as I was walking through the room, the pastor that was there, because my parents had renewed their vows, walked up to me. He said to me, "Did you write that prayer, or did you read it from somewhere?" And I said, "No, I wrote the prayer." I wasn't going to tell him that I heard it from God and have him think that I was crazy, because all of the other pastors and priests that I had spoken to had treated me like that. He's like, "That was very Pauline. As you were speaking, I had verses of the Bible flying through my head." So we wound up speaking for about 2 hours. I told him about the near death. I told him about hearing from God. And he's like, you had the Holy Spirit experience. You had that quickening. You had the Paul experience, where, Paul says he was raised to the third heaven, and whether he heard from the Lord or from a man, he wasn't sure. So he had given me his card and said, give me a call and we can meet and we can talk. And if you have any issues, give me a call. I learned that words matter. I mean, words really matter, especially when you're speaking to someone else. And because God knows what words will trigger a memory, or what will cause that person to understand what is being said, not take it the wrong way, and just makes life easier. So I did call him, and the pastor said, "You know what? I wanted to tell you. I knew I was going to hear from you." He said, "When I was leaving your brother's house, there's a long driveway." He said, I stopped at the end of the driveway to make the turn, and I was thinking about you and the discussion that we had. And as I looked from one side to the other, two shooting stars went across the sky very, very, very slowly. He's I'd never seen anything like that. So I knew it was a sign. I had to speak about the spiritual warfare that I was experiencing while I was trying to hear God, the fact that I was hearing spirits. And one of the things that I realized about spirits is, many times when you're hearing from spirits and other spirits are around and they know that someone is hearing from them, they want to be heard too. God had told me, one of the things that he taught me about, and he showed me with scripture, to only let him bring the spirits through for me to hear. That if I heard any other spirits, unless he told me that it was okay to acknowledge them and to speak with them, then I could speak with them if he said it was okay. But if not, just ignore them. He was teaching me spiritual warfare. I had turned on the TV and Oprah was on, and she had a reverend on, and I remember his name. Can I say his name? His name was Reverend Bacon, and he was speaking about the Holy Spirit and the Holy Spirit guiding. Then he said, he was talking about how less and less people were coming to the church because he's talking about this on Oprah, and he's talking about the Holy Spirit, how he does speak, you just have to listen. And it could just be a nudge, but people just today they just don't get it. Not everybody's getting it. And when things are busy, he has a hard time. And I'm thinking, I'm hearing him all the time. Sometimes there have been times when I've heard from God, I'd wake up hearing God speaking in the most beautiful, beautiful voice that sounded melodic. And the words were like reading one of David's Psalms, one of his Psalms of love. And there were mornings where I would wake up hearing angels singing or the music. And it's absolutely amazing. Well, I was so angry. I wrote a letter to him through the Oprah Winfrey show. And that's how I wound up writing in Oprah Winfrey's Spirit and Religion board. It's funny how the first time that I ever heard a spirit who I was guided to give a message to somebody, I was swimming in a pool. And as I was swimming in the pool, I kept hearing the word Michael, 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 and it was getting louder. And finally, I came up out of the water and I'm like, who is Michael? And there was this woman sitting on the side of the pool. And she said, she's looking at me and she said, did you just say who is Michael? And I said, yes, I thought it was, and I heard God say to me, say it, just say it. And he said, just tell her that you're able to hear Michael. And then I was getting these pictures of this young guy, and I hate to sound, but I saw him and I actually felt pain in my chest, a sharp pain, not like the pain that I had felt before from the embolism, but it was a sharp, hot pain because I heard him say, I shot myself. So I said to her, I don't even know how to say this. I said, I am able to hear from spirits. I only listen to spirits that God brings forth for me to hear. I said, I only call myself a medium because for today's language, that is something that people will understand more. And before I could say anything, she said he died. And I said, did he take his own life? And she said, yes. And I said, he shot himself, didn't he? And she started to cry. And I was feeling the love from both God and her son. He was telling me what to say. He was having me bring up other people in the family, their names. And she was just, they were having this conversation through me. And I'm just as I'm in the water, with water, up here, and she's sitting on the side of the pool, and we're having this conversation about her son that passed. She was just so grateful because he was telling her that he was sorry, that it wasn't her fault, of course, but he was also bringing up things that, anybody can say he's sorry if they found out who you were. I had never seen this woman in my life. I mean, I was swimming across a swimming pool. I didn't know anybody. She wound up knocking on my door later that day, and she brought me some of a casserole of a lasagna that she had made. And what is funny is that 4 different times that day, God had me doing this, and each time the person that I was hearing from was named Michael, to the point where I'm saying to God, am I really supposed to be saying this?
It's been really amazing. I really loved listening to you and your experience, and as questions were coming up in my head, you were answering them. So I
We had that happen
heard
the other
me.
night
I know
when
on the
we,
phone.
right.
That's right.
You were like, did
So
you
it's kind
just
of what was
say?
happening now, and I'm thinking, oh man, I'm not gonna have any questions to ask her. She's answering everything. There,
I was listening to God, and he was telling me, talk about this and talk about that,
that's
and
awesome.
use this word and use that word. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So,
Hmm.
just before we go, in the original, the original, in the first NDE, you had mentioned about God asking you questions,
Hmm.
and I was just wondering if you could give us a couple of samples of what those questions were.
Well, actually, it was my life review. I had my life review when I came back that night. So I mean, he asked me the typical, have you ever stolen? Have you ever hurt somebody? Have you ever, have you ever murdered somebody? Have you ever killed an animal deliberately? Have you ever lied? Have you ever beat your children? And he knew the answers. He wanted me to answer yes or no. It was questions that I could not say. He told me yes or no, yes or no.
Why do you think it is that some people hear directly the voice of God and some, well, others don't?
Well, I have no idea why he chose to give me those gifts. I have all the clairs. I can hear, I can smell, I can taste, I can feel, I can feel people's pain. I can see the energy. I can see your energy. Um, I have, I think some of the things that I recognize, that I see, is because I grew up the way I did, where I was just aware of my surroundings. I was aware of everything. So I think I just became in tune with that energy. Why God decided to use me, he's not giving me an answer, and I've asked. Um, I just know that he came to me at a time when everybody else had turned around and walked away. They either couldn't bear to watch me dying little by little, or they were too busy with work and with their own families. Um, all my life, all I ever wanted was love. I wanted a family. I wanted love. And the love that you feel from God, and the love that you feel from the spirits that you have given messages for, and the love that you feel from their family members who have received solace of some sort, as well as I know what it's like to lose people that I loved to death. And I know that we are all energy, that this will disappear, but there's that part of us that is connected to God, source, the creator, you know, what name you want to give to him. He came to me as God. He came to me as the Lord and God our Father. He taught me the difference. He taught me how to read what I needed to read in the Hebrew, in the Greek. He taught me to look at the history. He taught me to look at the geography and the archaeology of what has been found, what has been discovered. I've had a background where I've had so many jobs in different fields that I may not know them completely. It's like my husband used to say, jack of all trades, master of none. But you know enough that it's like, you know, you're able to feel all that, but yet you're able to, I'm able to keep my humility because growing up, or at least I hope and pray that I'm able to keep my humility because I was never allowed to raise my voice in this world, and I've met people that have gifts. So I have no idea why he gave this gift to me. I know that after 20 some years of feeling useless, after working all of my life in careers that helped people, I felt useless, especially when my kids went into the military. And then I got sick and I had my feet knocked out from under me. And I felt like I was just a wasted piece of flesh, that I was just using up resources until I died. So, why God did this, I'm not going to say to me, I'll say for me. I didn't go asking. Is like, you know, it's not all hunky dory and happy tears. I mean, I've been called by the church. I everything was great. I was hearing from spirits. I was doing. People were coming into my path. I had gotten a little bit where people knew me, and I've had people come up to me. So you're the one that hears from God, and they say, tell me what's going on in my life, and God has led me.
I really had a wonderful time speaking with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate everything. So grateful that you came on and shared all this with us. Thank you so much.
I'm glad that you called, and I'm glad that we were put on intersecting on our paths. And I was glad for this opportunity because I don't normally speak in public forums like this about the things that we have spoken about, because there's so many that have said, well, you didn't see the tunnel, you didn't see this, you didn't see that, you know, your brain didn't die. Well, they didn't do an EEG on me, they were concentrating on my heart. You know.
Take
You
care.
too,
All
and you
right.
take care and
You
get
too.
a good night's sleep.
Yeah, thanks. You too. Take
All
care.
righty. All right,
Ciao.
bye bye.
Bye.